Now, the investigations of Alger Hiss and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg grabbed a lot of headlines because of the position of Alger Hiss in the State Department, the very scandalous potential nature of the Rosenbergs' passing of atomic secrets. But HUAC gains even more publicity when a young senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, ends up becoming one of the lead prosecutors in these hearings. Joseph McCarthy had been elected to the Senate in 1946 to represent the state of Wisconsin. He was a World War II veteran who ran largely on his military record, although he did embellish a little bit on his combat details. McCarthy announced in 1950 that he had a list of 205 communists who worked for the State Department. And this announcement sent shockwaves through the US government, through the US media, that despite the fact, right, that we had a loyalty review, that we had had these HUAC hearings, that we could still have this many communists that had previously been undetected in the US government. Now, Joseph McCarthy never showed anybody this list. And in fact, when asked repeatedly about the list, the numbers kept changing. So it was only really 205 originally. So there is a lot of skepticism among scholars that he ever actually had a list to begin with, or if he did, that it was nearly that long. Nevertheless, McCarthy uses this list that he supposedly has to take over the HUAC hearings and to engage in very antagonistic questioning of people brought before HUAC. McCarthy does not play well with others, to put it mildly. And he is seen in these congressional hearings as a very caustic, very bullying presence in these hearings. And even people who are diehard anti-communists start to object to the way that Joseph McCarthy is interrogating people, the way that Joseph McCarthy is dredging up very tangential evidence from decades before in accusing a person of being communist or communist sympathizing. One of these people who started to critique Joseph McCarthy was a journalist named Edward Murrow. So Edward Murrow had gotten his start as a radio journalist, and in the early 1950s was the host of a CBS news program called See It Now. Murrow and his team decided that they could use the power of the relatively new medium of television to try to openly critique McCarthy and hopefully rein him in. Okay? And to get more broad support from senators, from other congressmen to monitor the hearings, to be less antagonistic. So Murrow and his colleagues employ what was then a relatively new tactic, although it may be one very familiar to you today, of using footage of someone to analyze and critique their opinions. So the See It Now episode that aired on March 9th, 1954, was a critique of McCarthy using McCarthy's own words. So the bulk of the episode was just clips of McCarthy in different contexts, both from publicly televised HUAC hearings, from televised political speeches and dinners, talking about the anti-communist crusade and talking about his motivations for being this aggressive in HUAC hearings. So Murrow really only comes in at the very end of the episode to put what McCarthy had said in these clips in context. This is how Edward Murrow concludes the March 9th, 1954 episode of See It Now. I'm going to read you his closing statement in which he sums up why See It Now has gone after McCarthy in this way and what he hopes to gain from this episode. Murrow says, earlier, the senator asked, "Upon what meat does this our Caesar feed?" Had he looked 3 lines earlier in Shakespeare's Caesar, he would have found this line, which is not altogether inappropriate. "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." No one familiar with the history of this country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating, but the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between internal and external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were, for the moment, unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom, wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck. That was Murrow's signature sign-off every episode. Good night, and good luck. After that episode aired on March 9th, 1954, Joseph McCarthy demanded airtime to issue a formal rebuttal to the See It Now episode, which he got on April 6, 1954. Now, Murrow's episode of See It Now, at a time where there were only 3 television stations broadcast across the United States, was widely seen and was but one dent in McCarthy's reputation. What really will bring McCarthy down as a political figure and bring out public opinion against him for his tactics is the Army McCarthy hearings held in April and May of 1954. When McCarthy, again on live broadcast, accuses the Army of harboring communists, this is what starts to rapidly disintegrate public support for his crusade and his tactics.